Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Academic Perspectives on ChatGPT webinar brought to you by NIST, the National Institute of Statistical Sciences. My name is Analisa Flores, and I'm a member of the NIST Academic Affiliates Committee, which is responsible for organizing this event. I'll be moderating today's session. I'm an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Statistics at the University of California, Riverside, where I also earned my PhD in applied statistics. My current work focuses on creating education infrastructure and pathways for data science and statistics, with an emphasis on increasing inclusion, diversity, and equity for underrepresented minority populations. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists today about their take on ChatGPT and other similar technology that's making its way into our classrooms. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar, Academic Perspectives on ChatGPT, focuses on the recent rise of advanced language models such as ChatGPT, which have presented both opportunities and challenges in the realm of education. We've organized this webinar dedicated to exploring opportunities versus constraints of these tools and to providing faculty, members, and students insights on their usage in the academic setting. Our panelists will shed some light on the ethical considerations surrounding the use of language models in education, as well as explore responsible ways of integrating these tools into the curriculum, emphasizing the importance of teaching students how to effectively leverage technology while maintaining academic honesty and intellectual growth. This discussion will also explain natural language processing as a tool and how we can apply large language models to transform education. Each of our panelists will provide their initial perspectives on ChatGPT and other language models, and then we're going to open it up to a panel discussion for 30 to 40 minutes. If time remains, we'll take audience questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing our first of our three panelists, who will then share her perspectives, and then we'll continue moving through the other two panelists. Dr. Yue Dong is our first panelist. She's an assistant professor of computer science and engineering at the University of California, Riverside. She obtained her PhD in computer science at McGill University and Mila, Canada. During her PhD, she interned at Google, AI, AI2, Microsoft, and Noah's Ark Lab. She's published more than 10 papers at top-tier conferences, with one of her first authored papers winning the Best Paper Award. Her research interests include natural language processing, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. She leads the Natural Language Processing Group, which develops natural language understanding and generation systems that are controllable, trustworthy, and efficient. Welcome, Dr. Dong. You now have the floor.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Analisa. So it is definitely a great pleasure to be here. So I definitely just want to really give everyone kind of like some technical background about how these language models start to shine on the stage. So language models actually started really early. It was kind of like in 1950s, we already think, hey, can we teach machines to speak like human languages? And it was really because of the deep learning. It started in around like 2013. So that's where we really start to use neural networks. And language modeling, when you think about it, is very easy. Just it tries to assign every text sequence we speak a probability. So a good language model should be able to assign like fluent sentences, sentences that embed reasoning, sentences that can do math, a high probability. And essentially, this is all going back and connect with the statistics. And so what we see, this kind of like amazing power of large language models really comes from the extreme scales. You can think about the current language models, essentially see all the data on the website, and it has been trained with large models with like billions of parameters, and it has been seeing trillions of tokens. It has been trained on a bunch of GPUs. And so what I think is definitely it's going to bring a lot of very amazing impact in education. And so one thing I think is very promising is no matter what, the education resources we have in North America is very limited. And then this kind of large language models can provide a one-on-one, a one-to-one tutor to the student. So rather than really rely on the TA and the professors to answer all the questions, they should be able to have a more interactive session with the large language models to facilitate the learning. However, I think later we'll talk a little bit more about the limitations of large language models. You probably are very well know of it. They hallucinate a lot, and of course sometimes they teach unsafe stuff. So like, how do we make sure that these things are properly addressed is actually the focus of my research.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dong. I love that mistakes that these models make are called hallucinations. Okay, so next I'd like to go ahead and introduce our second panelist for this session, Dr. Amanda Ellis. Dr. Ellis is the Vice Chair of the Department of Biostatistics and Director of Graduate Studies of the Master of Science in Biostatistics program at the University of Kentucky. Her focus is on graduate education, along with course and curriculum development. She earned her undergraduate degree in mathematics from the University of Kentucky, where she also earned her MS and PhD in statistics. Dr. Ellis also previously taught at Eastern Kentucky University, where she focused on undergraduate and graduate education. Thank you for being here, Dr. Ellis. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So if you could tell from my introduction, I'm very interested in education. In my current position, I teach 6 different graduate level courses. So I teach a lot of students and I teach a variety of topics. So, earlier this year when ChatGPT was getting a lot of press, and a lot of it was negative press. Very naturally, I was, interested in how am I going to incorporate this in my classroom? What impacts is this going to have on my teaching? And so we started looking into that and figuring out, okay, is this really the end of education, like some of these news articles said, or is this more a tool and I can figure out how to implement this tool in my classroom? And through learning about ChatGPT, I think one of the things that makes educators very nervous is it seems like every week there is new information coming out. And so as an educator, just trying to keep pace with that is very, very difficult. And so I think that causes a lot of nervousness about how we're going to incorporate this in our classroom and how we're going to do so ethically. And so some of the things that I'm really interested in are how can we use ChatGPT and other things really as tools, but make sure that we teach students to use those tools ethically and to make sure that that doesn't impact the students' learning. So are we bypassing some of those really important learning steps by using things like ChatGPT?
Great. Thank you. I'm also very interested in that since I teach a lot of courses. And as I was thinking about your position, I'm curious, and maybe we can touch on this later, if there's a difference between undergraduate versus graduate courses and how it's implemented. That's also something to consider. Okay, so thank you so much. We'll move on to our third panelist, Dr. Michael Hugh. Dr. Hugh has been contributing his expertise in bioinformatics at the West Virginia University School of Medicine since 2019, both as an assistant professor and as director of the bioinformatics core. After earning his PhD in biomedical engineering from Peking University in 2009, he furthered his research skills at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, National Institutes of Health. Dr. Hugh's key focus areas include studying drug resistance and blood cancers, exploring various uses of bioinformatics, and applying large language models to transform education, research, and clinical practice. Welcome, Dr. Hugh.
Thanks, Anis, for the great introductions, and thanks for hosting this event. So I'm the director of Bioinformatics Core at West Virginia University. And for Bioinformatics Core, there are 2 commitments. One is for team science, and the other one is for bioinformatics educations. I'm also affiliated with School of Medicine, and many of the research projects for students here ask for data analysis, including coding, which is something very challenging. So earlier this year, so so like ChatGPT is sweeping the world like a storm, and what we found is ChatGPT, everyone knows, is very good at talking, have a good biology knowledge, and surprisingly, by that time, to me, is very good at coding. So if we're putting all this together, then ChatGPT has the potential to make data analysis more accessible to everyone, right? So, and then through our practice with ChatGPT, we found the communication is the key. So it's an art, at the same time, it's a science. And so one of our research direction actually is to explore the innovative ways of integrating ChatGPT in education, in research, and potentially clinical practice. So on the education part, earlier this year, we proposed a framework called Optima to guide coding with ChatGPT. So essentially, like I mentioned, we can talk to ChatGPT to describe our data and the required data analysis, and the output from ChatGPT will be the code. And students essentially can run the code, evaluate the results, and provide feedback to ChatGPT to refine the codes. So this process is iterative, going back and forth with ChatGPT and the students. Through this process, we learn prompting skill, meaning how to communicate with ChatGPT, and also, we learn coding skill. That is the main focus. And most importantly is critical thinking, because if you need to evaluate the results, provide feedback to ChatGPT to refine the results. On the research part, we advocate a new research direction we coined as prompt bioinformatics. Essentially, is to use the chatbots for advanced bioinformatics data analysis. So we teamed with collaborators with tens of universities across the nation, and we use natural language. We try to push to use natural language to guide complex bioinformatics data analysis. We developed, we explored different prompting skills and to minimize hallucination in coding and to maximize results, reproducibilities, and the outcome of twofolds from our research. The first one is on methodology. So it's to examine or evaluate different prompting skills to improve coding efficiency. And the other one is to provide a knowledge base by including prompt pipelines covering a variety of bioinformatics topics. And lastly, we are also trying to explore the potential of using ChatGPT to help clinicians or healthcare providers. So recently, we discovered a very interesting feature of ChatGPT is that in the one chat session, the ChatGPT has an amazing capacity to simulate multiple experts from different backgrounds. So we call it multi-role playing. And we apply this feature to explore the benefits and the risk of use chatbots in sports rehab, because this is an interdisciplinary questions. And on the other hand, we are also using ChatGPT to address the United States medical licensing exam as a toy model to explore how ChatGPT can help a healthcare provider to make decisions. And the question we select are generally tough questions that requires or assess interdisciplinary knowledge. So in summary, from our own experience, we found ChatGPT is, or other large language model chatbots, a good assistant for students to learn coding. On the research side, it could make data analysis more accessible to students and boost their productivities. And it has a potential to assist healthcare professionals and for better care of patients. Of course, there's many limitations we also discovered, so we can discuss that later.
Okay, great. Thank you. That actually leads perfectly into my first question. This question is for all of the panelists. So as you have more things to say, you're welcome to jump in and add your contributions. So I think really it would be great to start off with kind of like an overarching question of the benefits and limitations in the educational setting. So Dr. Hu kind of touched on these in terms of the research and the actual application. But if we kind of reframe or rethink this in terms of the classroom or a research project that a student's working on or an application that a graduate student is trying to, apply ChatGPT to. Do you all have some experience with how you've seen benefits or limitations or what you're trying or potential benefits and limitations that you could discuss with us?
I can start this one. So I think there are several benefits and there's also several limitations. But one of the things that I'm noticing is, so for faculty, ChatGPT can be really useful when it comes to building materials or assignments. And so this can either be on the back end, we can use it to help generate, for example, exam questions or homework questions, or even just to help write assignments. But then we could also, build assignments and in those directions, direct students on how to use ChatGPT and give them direction. One of the real limitations that we're finding is examples that we used back in the spring. Now, when we feed those prompts to ChatGPT, we're not getting the same things that we were in the spring. So often when I think of, the materials that I build for my course, I do want to build them for some longevity. I don't want to be constantly recreating materials each and every semester. But due to how ChatGPT is changing, what we're finding is maybe materials or suggestions that we make back in the spring, either for students or for faculty that are, building things, those same suggestions might have to be altered even as soon as this fall. So I think that's one of the limitations. It is growing and it is changing so much, and it's not growing in the sense that it's always getting better. Sometimes it's also getting worse due to limitations that are even put on it. And so I think that's one of the real limitations in terms of right now, because of how things are changing, is that the recommendations or the examples that we're using may not be as good 6 months from now.
So I can go next. So definitely I first want to offer some maybe kind of like explanations about why you see the model constantly changing. One feature actually people or researchers has been trying very hard to add is the safety kind of like a perspective of large language models. So what we have observed is when we're doing this kind of like safety alignments, usually there is a trade-off with the performance, and a lot of people have been complaining and observe it online that it seems like even GPT-4 the performances start to drop. So it just I want to throw some speculations there. But what I see in terms of the limitations, what I definitely think it's really great we offer students the tools and also offer the educators the tools. Well, what I'm kind of like unclear about this long-term impact, because I feel like higher education is for teaching students for critical thinking. And now with all these tools, I feel like the boundaries start to become blurry, because like who write that and who's thinking is behind this. Those are the things getting a little bit hard for us to assess. And I just feel like we really need some new kind of curriculum so that we can still ensure we facilitate students' critical thinking, which is I think necessary training for higher education and to get them to be prepared for to be an excellent researcher. And one limitation we have seen for ChatGPT, it does very well for the things it has seen a lot. We call it long tail examples. So those are a lot of these examples. It happens in elementary school, happens in high school. It could also happen in undergraduate studies. But for graduate studies, we want students to be able to essentially look at research papers and think critically and also creatively out of the box. And that's where I really start to get a little bit worried. It is if like students are overly rely on this kind of tools, how much is left for them to think independently?
So we have a question in the chat. I was going to see if I could go ahead and answer that because I thought it'd be a good time to now, or did we want to wait until the end?
I agree. If you can touch on it now, if you don't mind, I think that would be great, just so that people have kind of an understanding of how it's being implemented in the classroom.
Yes. So the question is the chat ask if I could share an example of how I use ChatGPT to create homework problems in statistics and probability. So I'll give two different examples of how I think that it could be really useful. One of them is just to help generate what those questions are. So myself and Dr. Emily Slade, we have a recent paper that's out, and we actually talk about some of the ways that we've used this. And so one of the examples that we have in there is we ask ChatGPT, we actually say, write 3 free responses for us, or 3 response questions. And I think the example we give in the paper is we just say on power and sample size. And so ChatGPT will actually produce some of those questions for you. Now, I will say, in my own experience, I never consider what I get from ChatGPT when it's writing questions for me to be the final question that I'm going to use. I use it more as a launching point. So it gives me kind of a very rough draft of what a question could be. Because sometimes for me, especially if I'm writing exam questions, just getting started is hard. And then once I kind of have an idea, I can roll with it and make those questions better. So it just kind of helps generate ideas of what questions could be. The other way that I would use it is to actually, I could feed my exam questions in to ChatGPT and give the responses that it would give. Sometimes it gives really good responses. Sometimes there's common errors in those responses. And something like that could be really useful if you're writing multiple choice questions. So, sometimes if we write multiple choice questions, figuring out what the bad answer should be can be really difficult for multiple choice. I remember, pre-ChatGPT, I would always go and pull old student exams and see what were the common wrong answers to help me write my multiple choice questions. Well, now I can use ChatGPT and ask it, well, what is the answer to this question? And then use those, bad answers that it sometimes gives to help me, figure out what those, selections should be for my multiple choice questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Does anybody else have anything else to add before we kind of move on to the next question?
Yeah, one thing I could add is Michael. So I could add about the limitation of use ChatGPT in education is the lack of human touch. So, and this is very important sense. So when we learn, sometimes we learn as a group, and that will boost the efficiency. Some of other things you already mentioned is about hallucination and over reliance on high tech. As for benefits, I think is ChatGPT could help to facilitate personalized learnings, is 724 accessible. And I think this is probably more important for some underserved area, rural area, for students, because sometimes it's very difficult to find a tutor instantly, especially for coding. So ChatGPT also is knowledgeable in almost everything, meaning that it can cover a lot of topics. So this is also, so this is very valuable for students.
All right, thank you. So I guess at this point, we've kind of talked about faculty usage, creating assignments, things like that. Dr. Hugh has talked about students and sort of that individualized thinking and accessibility. So maybe kind of in that same thought, let's move on to the next question, which is asking about student use in terms of data analysis or interpretation or completing a homework assignment or working on a research project. Can ChatGPT be used effectively for them? If so, how? What are some things that students might be able to leverage ChatGPT for?
So based on our working experience with ChatGPT, and we realize ChatGPT is a good assistant for data analysis and in terms of coding. So in coding, is that for many of these questions, if it can be addressed in coding, right? So ChatGPT now has a plugin called Code Interpreter, and they rename it to Advanced Data Analysis. So from that plugin, so students has the data, has a description about the data analysis, and that can be uploaded to ChatGPT and or typed in, send the instruction to ChatGPT. And then what ChatGPT or Code Interpreter will do is it will evaluate the questions, right? Come up with data analysis strategies and the coding. It write code for it and run the code instantly and output the results. And come back to the students as you could evaluate the results. When you evaluate the results, ask the question, does the results make sense? Right? If it does not make sense, is there any way you can improve the description you just sent to ChatGPT, right? To help ChatGPT to refine the data analysis and to converge the results to the expected results. So this is from education. Because from education, it's very often you will have the reference results. You can always compare what are the results you got from ChatGPT with the reference results. But I think the main point is critical thinking, because when you evaluate the results, you need critical thinking. So why it does not make sense. And the ChatGPT can also revise the code. You could ask the ChatGPT to compare the different code and to list the reason why you make this change. So this is one thing I think is, as for data interpretations, I think that part is for students. Students is more in charge of data interpretations and how to interpret the results, give feedback to students. Code interpreter also has some limitations. So as for now, it's only support one programming language, Python, and it does not allow, ChatGPT does not allow you to install software. So this is critical because sometimes the data analysis you want to do, right, requires a new package. And the default package or pre-installed packages does not include the specific package you want. So you will not be able to do the data analysis. And the other one is, it does not allow you to download data from the internet to the sandbox. It's a firewall, protected environment. But for some of the data analysis, you may require instant access to some data, right? But in my mind, these are technical issues. So in the long term, it can be, or maybe it can be addressed in my mind. Yeah, so this is our experience about working with ChatGPT. So as it's not perfect, but is much better than what we experienced in earlier this years.
So I can hop in next, and I'll kind of address it in two ways. I think there are ways that students can use it. And then the next part of that would be, but what are students actually doing? Because I think those are two very separate answers. In terms of what students can do with ChatGPT, I think almost the sky is the limit. I've read papers that have used ChatGPT to help tutoring. And advocating for, especially at institutions where there isn't a lot of TAs or faculty support, that ChatGPT can use a tutor. And I think someone already mentioned that here today. I think ChatGPT can help with writing. So for students where maybe English is their second language, it can help, clean up some of the writing style. It can also just help write first drafts for students. It can also help with tone. So for example, I use it this way. Sometimes if I have to write a really difficult email, I will put that email into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, what is the tone of this? Was the tone of it too harsh? So it can help with writing. It can help with coding. There can also, we get into some more ethical concerns. Of course, if it asks the question, what is the interpretation of this confidence interval? ChatGPT can also answer that. Now, in terms of what students are actually doing, my honest answer is I don't think we know. I realized at the beginning of this semester, it was like many probably people here, I was writing my syllabi and I had to put in a clause about ChatGPT. And I thought, I don't know what to put, because most of the time when I put information in my syllabus, it's based off of my experience with students. And either there are behaviors that I'm trying to mitigate, or there's behaviors I want them to have. But I realized in this case, I don't actually know what they're doing. So I decided this semester, I actually have an open AI policy, and I'm asking my students weekly, did you use ChatGPT or some other tool that's out there, just so I can understand what is it that my students are doing this semester, because I honestly have no idea. And so we're only in week 4 right now. And to my surprise, and I have about in total 70 students this semester across 3 different graduate level courses, very few of my students are using it regularly, which was kind of, that was surprising for me. I was expecting to see all of the time. Now, are they being honest with me? Of course, I don't know that, but I don't think they're using it as much as we think they are. But I think there is a lot of potential for how they can use it.
Yeah, so I might want to offer something from the other perspective. So for my graduate course, it's mainly students need to write a report, they need to write proposals. So what we have seen, it's a little bit opposite. It's a student using it too much. So at the end, we have to use GPT-0 or other detector to see whether this is machine generated or human generated. So that's something happens actually during the midterm around midterm. So that's kind of like in March, where ChatGPT, this kind of generative AI tools start to become more and more popular. And then afterwards, we have to re-educate the student what we're expecting you to use it for. You can use it for like a proofreading. You can use it for like just correcting some errors or like help you to think, but you don't use it to write a whole like a paper, and those are very easy to detect, right? Especially this detection tools. Of course, it can tell you, it cannot say 100% this is AI generated, but from the likely, and also if the longer the AI write, the more easier or confidence the detection tools are. So those are something I feel like we need to be clear to the student about what's the scope you can use it for and what is our expectations. And then when I teach the undergraduate NLP course, it's a little bit different because I teach computer science course. I need to teach students how to do the coding. So it's kind of like different in the sense that they cannot directly just use it to produce a code and submit it. They need to understand each of the line what they're doing. So I did see some difficulties here that we have to break all this long piece of code into lines, and so that student at least they write a code, it could be machine generated, but they need to explain what they're doing there, and they need to like run different tests to see whether they understand it correctly. So I feel like this is a huge shift for the student and for the teacher to make sure that they are learning what they're supposed to learn.
So I actually have a follow-up question for you. I'm curious, with your more technical, expertise than I have. Most of the things that I've been reading about the detectors say that it's almost as good as a coin flip. I think OpenAI even put out an article recently about ChatGPT specifically, saying that the detector that they had developed, if I remember right, I think they were even not going to offer it anymore because it was not very good at correctly detecting when a student had used ChatGPT or not. So can you talk a little bit more about your experience about how good you think those detectors actually are?
Yeah, so all these detectors are statistical, right? So of course, usually what happens is the longer the text outputs are, the higher confidence we have towards that. I do think, so how it works in the past is this propensity based. So it's really depends on the probability of language models saying like how likely this is human generated. I think what I have observed, which could be possible, is we start to observe tech companies kind of like adding watermarks in their generations. I don't really know how this is going to lay out in the future, but I think this is definitely usually give us a more reliable way of detecting. However, you probably could see that recent GPT models start to give you some very weird word choices. I think that's kind of like their early attempts of kind of incorporating these watermarks. And those would usually give us a stronger statistical confidence that this is generated by machine, because it's very rare human would use this kind of like choices. However, I do totally agree. I don't think like even in my class, if we detected at the end, I asked students to keep a log of what they have been written, so that if we suspect anything, you show me the log. Hey, this is really what I have been working on. I don't think we should just use it as a sole tool to say, hey, this is not written by you. That's definitely, we never can give you 100% like judgments, and that's where I see really the fine line is.
Yeah, on the other hand, so it is also our educators' responsibility to think about novel ways for the assessment. So during the assessment, if you ask more details, and the assessment you ask more details, it is less likely you will have ChatGPT to give the answer. So especially if you're asking some personal experience or sense, personal thoughts, so that will be very challenging for ChatGPT to handle.
Yeah, I also saw Chad has a question, and I may answer that about the bias of the models because it's kind of like really what I work on. Yeah, so there is a funny paper at the Best NLP conference when the Best Paper Award this year. Some of you might not be aware that actually language models has its own political views. So like that paper analyzing, like for example, GPT-4 may be more like leaning towards one political party, where some other models like which are more trained on Fox News is having a totally different perspective. So I think that what's good for now is we have different choices of large language models, but yes, each of them do have their own bias, and sometimes it's interesting to see that different language models, their bias are conflicting with each other.
All right, thank you for addressing the questions that as they're coming through the Q&A. There was a question that was asked earlier in the Q&A, and it's actually one of the questions that has been on my list, but also I'm sure on most people's lists, is the ethical considerations for academic purposes. I think each of you have kind of already touched a little bit on it, but sort of like, what is the biggest concern that you might have when either you're using it or students are using it, either in terms of classwork or maybe even research that they're doing? I know Dr. Hugh mentioned, they need to be, I think it was Dr. Hugh, sorry if it was Dr. Dong, but they need to be creative, right? They need to have critical thinking skills. They need to be able to figure out where their research is headed without somebody else necessarily telling them. And this is true for faculty as well who are doing research. So are there any like major red flag ethical considerations that are really high on your radar of things to look out for?
One thing that I really worry about, and I don't know that I would call this my biggest, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of chatter about this, is the equity issue, is that if this is a tool that is giving students an advantage in the classroom, if students are not trained on this, then it won't be an even playing field for all of my students. And especially as we start to see services that are offered that cost money, I do worry about that equity issue, that there are going to be some students that are able to purchase maybe some of these that work better, whereas my students that can't make those purchases, they're going to be at a disadvantage, especially as this proceeds and we start to figure out ways that this can really be used as a tool. Being able to incorporate that in my classroom to kind of help level that playing field for my students is really important for me.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, for this great points. So from my side, I think one limitations of large language model chatbots nowadays is to support their claims with source or citations. So for students to use ChatGPTs for learning and also for research, is very important to create the source. I think that we also have to address hallucinations, right? So the second one is it's very important for students to disclose the use, how you use it, right? And be responsible to use it. And if you're using ChatGPT, you need to send out data back to OpenAI. And before doing that, you need to ask yourself, does this data top secret in the lab, for example? Are you allowed to do so? Are this data protected by some regulations? So we need to respect data privacy.
Yeah, so I absolutely what Amanda and Michael said. It's definitely like really what I also feel like it's very important ethical concerns. like going like just beyond like academic, but I think it's kind of like also generally applicable is really the copyright, because currently what's language models saying, it's kind of like learn on all the data, right? And Mike also said some of that could be private. For example, they Dan Klein, I think from UBC, they had a paper that ChatGPT is not supposed to be trained on Harry Potter, but you can definitely tell it has been trained on that. It's able to tell all the details, which is definitely not like something you can fabricate like easily. So that's something I would be a bit concerned, and we have seen a lot of like protests in writers and in artists about like who owns the copyright, like what if they use my talent and how could I get like credit or acknowledged by that. So that's something I would be quite concerned. I think this is something the policymakers need to be aware, and we definitely need to address this going forward.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So sort of tying into that idea is, how can we as educators ensure that ChatGPT generated content aligns with academic integrity standards? So whether we're using it or whether our students are using it, are there ways for us to help make sure that we're still, you know, aligning our techniques with university missions and things like that of teaching our students? And I'm not sure if this ties in exactly, but a question did come through the chat saying, like, is there a way we can figure out if students are doing things that they shouldn't be doing with ChatGPT? Like, are there methods besides, you know, these kind of checkers that would help us be able to flag or identify it a little bit easier? Maybe in the chat question, it says like traps, like something that we know is going to give a wrong answer through ChatGPT. Like, is there do you have any, I guess, experience with that or familiarity with things that we can do?
So I think the plagiarism question is it's a really interesting question, because if we think of how plagiarism is typically defined, there's source material. You know, if I say my student has plagiarized, I can actually go and find that specific source material and I can point to it. With ChatGPT, you can't do that. And so just the definition of what is plagiarism, I think, kind of changes here. And so, you know, when it comes to plagiarism and academic integrity, ChatGPT, I think, is making us kind of redefine what that means. And I don't know that I have a clear definition right now, even for myself within my classroom, of where that line is. Because, you know, I think of, you know, of course, you know, plagiarism, where, you know, I can find the source material it's been copied from, of course, that's plagiarism. All the way at the other end, you know, when I've had, I've encouraged my students to use tools like Grammarly in the future, which is where they put in their material, but Grammarly still makes word suggestions, grammatical suggestions, you know, and I've encouraged my students to use that. I see ChatGPT, it's kind of somewhere in the middle there, you know, it's this continuum. And where do I draw that line of, well, this is no longer ethical? I can give examples of things that I think aren't ethical, but actually drawing and defining that line, I think, is really difficult. And I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation that we have in the education space of how do we really define what academic integrity is in terms of ChatGPT and kind of in this new era of using these tools. So I'm sorry, that wasn't an exact answer, but this is something I've really been struggling with is, you know, how do I define that? Because I need to define this clearly for my students, and making that clear definition I have found to be very difficult.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question. Amanda touched a very interesting points about the definition of plagiarisms. And from my point is, but when we look at the work like presented by our students, we can ask ourselves or the students how much of this work is contributed by the students, right? If this work is 100% generated by ChatGPT, then it's 100% from ChatGPT. So the main point is the working with AI, we need to be very careful about the content that is generated. So to be careful on this one, you need to identify the source. The ChatGPT itself, the training process, it does not identify the source. Identify the source, that process is actually not an easy job in my mind. It also created thinking. And sometimes the student also need to add in your own experience. Once you add our own thoughts, and the adding own source or experience that ask for details, right? So, so I think putting all this together perhaps can help us to better define what is plagiarism and what is not plagiarism. I think eventually, so we will reach that point, but so far it's indeed an open question in my mind.
So someone in the chat, I think, brought up a really good point. I think in response to what I had said, that they said, to me, the unauthorized assistance model seems more useful than plagiarism, at least at this time. And I would agree. That's why I was saying ChatGPT, I view it somewhere between like a Grammarly and plagiarism. You know, the Grammarly, I mean, at least I encourage my students to use that. I mean, I see that as a tool that's often used in the workforce, but it's not really Grammarly. So I guess it's more defining what is the unauthorized use of that assistance. Are we, you know, saying you can't use it at all? Or are we saying you can use this assistance, but under these certain parameters, and defining what those are, I think is what's going to be really difficult. So that was a really good comment.
Yeah, so I've been implementing a bunch of measures, and I think so far it's quite successful. It's sometimes I would always have a class quiz where I tell them, hey, like this is the time you talk with your colleagues, and then that's usually really helpful. It's no matter they learn from this kind of like assistance or not, they need to explain to their peers, and that's something I have seen to be quite useful. And some other faculty members at my university said, like, if they had like open book exams, they have to redesign it. They had like they run all their questions through ChatGPT and then pick the ones that currently cannot be answered correctly. So I do agree with Amanda. I think a lot of them really depends on what we tell students and what is acceptable and what is not. And the thing is, a lot of times us as educator, we don't even know what's best for the student yet. And I really appreciate this kind of discussions that we sit together and then discuss about like, definitely I also agree with a lot of comments. I think it's not fair to tell students don't use it and they might lose this edge or advantages, right? A lot of people saying like in the future, the great workers are the one know how to do prompt engineering, how to like ask the right questions to ChatGPT. So I just feel like a lot of this technology is developing so quickly, so we don't really even have that much time to think or to react towards it. And I do appreciate this kind of webinar really tell us what are the concerns, and we can sit down and discuss about it and then potentially come up with a solution.
It definitely seems like everybody's trying to navigate their way through this with lots of opinions coming from different places and perspectives. So I agree, just hearing different takes on things kind of gives you a new way to look at things that maybe you hadn't thought of before. I want to tie this back maybe to this conversation about, you know, do we give students access? Do we not give them access? Who's to say? How do we make the communication clear so students know what they aren't allowed to do? So we have a question that asks, like, what steps should the academic institutions themselves be taking to ensure responsible and secure usage of ChatGPT and other similar tools in the academic setting? So I think everybody's kind of discussed maybe a little bit about what they're doing in their individual classrooms, but kind of more broader, what could these universities be doing?
I would say faculty training, you know, making sure that they're offering training to their faculty. So so at our institution, we have a group that's for the entire university, and they're kind of taking the lead on these things. That's out of our computer science department, and they're offering, you know, workshops to faculty, seminars to faculty, so that, you know, to kind of help distill all of that information so that it's, you know, it's easier for faculty to go and learn about it, because they have to learn first before, you know, of course, we can decide what we're going to do in our classrooms and to help our students with these tools. But at the same time, it's really daunting because, as we've talked about, there's a lot of information out there. It seems like it is, you know, changing. So to have someone at the university level is kind of helping getting that information together, distilling it, and then giving it to faculty so that they can keep up to speed, I think is really important.
Yeah, so I think UCR is really doing very great in terms of that, like sending emails about what's their opinions. However, I also think this is something more like depends on the college and department, as each department what their requirement is very different. I would think about like in social science compared to like engineering, probably the expectations are very different. So I've seen like at least my department had a lot of this kind of like discussions, and I have been discussing with the education department, and definitely people have different kind of like perspectives and expectations. And it's currently I think it's still kind of like moving very fast, and there is a lot of different opinions, and what's the best way we don't know yet. So I would probably looking forward to see some kind of like maybe experiments coming out, and we would have like more solid studies indicating what is the right way going forward.
Yeah, second to Gia's comments. So I think it's very important and for the communities to test some of the hypotheses. For example, one simple one is that using ChatGPT will really boost the writing skills, right? Not only for beginners, but also for professionals. And recently there is several papers published in high-profile journals that actually support the use of ChatGPT to polish the writing. Actually can boost the quality of the writings by a lot, and this is very good sense for some students whose first language is not English. But the main thing is that through this process, students can learn how to write a better paragraph.
So we have discussed, using ChatGPT in the classroom and for research. But now that Dr. Hugh has talked about writing and first language, or English not your first language, what do you think about like academic or administrative kind of tasks, like writing letters of recommendation, or writing reports, or writing, things like that, either faculty or students or admin within academic institutions? Do you have any thoughts on that and the implications of using ChatGPT?
So yeah, so one thing I could touch on is writing recommendation letters, but we need to be very careful because writing recommendation letters cover a lot of privacies. So this one, if we're using ChatGPT to do that one, so may not be ideal or may not be ASIC in my mind. So but in the future, if there is a local version, right? So you have a local one locally installed or specific software you could use other than transfer the data, which covers many of the privacies for OpenAI. So that issue could be addressed.
Yeah, so to me this is kind of like a double-edged sword. So I kind of like I write recommendation letters, but in the meanwhile I receive letters from emails from students. So one thing you may or may not find is ChatGPT style is very verbose, so it tends to write very long sentences and not hit the point, which I feel like it going against like effective communication, right? Of course we can write a lot of beautiful and nice and kind of messages, but from what I have been talking to other faculties, what they do is they just ignore those sentences, and they really try to find which is the part that is personalized, that is strict to the point. So I think like definitely in the sense of like helping us to draft the structures, it could be helpful. It could help us to think about, hey, what do I want to mention in the recommendation letter, or like in a inquiry email for like the supervision, things like that. We know how to put our bullet points in there. However, I also agree with Michael. I think this is a lot of gray areas, and the privacy and this kind of things needs to be considered in the picture as well.
So I'll kind of take a different viewpoint on this question, not just with the letters of recommendation, but with administrative tasks in general. So one of the concerns that I have with the use of ChatGPT, especially for administrative things, these are often the things that they take me time, but they're not necessarily using a lot of my brain power, if that makes sense. And so I use chat, I think of, ChatGPT, I'm like, in one hand, I'm like, oh, it's great. It could help me lessen the amount of time I spend on these tasks. But then when I think of my workday as a whole, I think, oh, wait, that means I'm spending more of my workday doing the really, really hard stuff. And so I worry about the implications that this is going to have on burnout for people. If we, those tasks that are a little bit easier, if we're doing them even quicker, that means we're spending more time on our really, really hard task. Like I said, I worry about burnout. We see something similar when we all jumped on Zoom. It used to be in between my meetings, I'd have to walk from one place on campus to the next. So yes, that took up my time, but it was kind of downtime that I had, and it was kind of nice. I could spend that time kind of thinking. Whereas now it's not unusual for me to be on back-to-back meetings with no time in between. And so, of course, that causes burnout. And so I worry that by offloading some of our administrative tasks onto things like ChatGPT, that we're risking burnout in the future.
I think that's a really great point that I hadn't really considered. Thoughts on students maybe using this for personal statements or essays for applications for things? I help run a summer program, and students were submitting essays, and some were questionable, like, did the student really write this or not? Any thoughts on that kind of idea?
I think the bottom line is disclose the use. It's like we submit your papers, right? We use ChatGPT to polish the writing. Then in the method section or in the acknowledgement section, you say you use ChatGPT to polish the writing. So I think this is the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like for these kind of models at the current stage, I can still personally tell whether this is like a genuine writing, or this is just like someone using ChatGPT and writing me a long email and it has like no materials in it. And then also like we have been talking about like hallucinations, right? So the model still has its own limitations. So of course this makes things a bit easier for us to spot, especially for research papers. I think for I was review conference papers and the submissions, I can still definitely tell like of the quality of the paper. But going forward, I don't know what's going to be in 2 years, and we never know, right? So definitely, I think for now, I feel like okay for that, and let's see how this evolves.
All right, I am going to start polling. I know we've kind of been doing it as we go, but I'm going to start polling some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A just to make sure we have time to get to them before the end of our session today. So one of the question statements talks about AI not taking your job, but it being somebody who knows how to use AI. So I think we touched a little bit on this, but if the expected wave of AI applications actually arrives, won't it be the responsibility of educators to learn and teach its effective and appropriate use?
So I was going to agree with this one. I saw this one that came out earlier, and what this made me think of, it actually kind of relates to the quote that's down there at the bottom about when computers were invented. But both of those are right. So if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, they kind of talk about this in there. But when we think of NASA, it used to be they had whole teams of people that would do calculations by hand, and then computers came along. And those people that were able to program the computers, they got the new jobs. And so this kind of goes with the AI won't take your job, but somebody that knows how to use AI will take your job. It's the exact same argument we heard that when computers were invented. And I think this goes right along with the argument of we need to see this as a tool and figuring out how to effectively use that tool and integrate it into how we work. And so, of course, as we're training students, we want to make sure that we are training our students how to effectively enter the workforce. And so I think, if this is part of the workforce, then yeah, we need to learn to use this tool as educators and educate our students on how to use these tools and what are, ethical ways to use these tools, what are good ways, effective ways to use these tools. I think we have to eventually. I do think we are early in that, maybe some of these questions aren't answered yet, but we do need to be thinking about these things. I do think it is going to be our responsibility as educators. If they're going to be using it in the workforce, we should be helping to train them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, this is actually a great questions, like many others. So, and like I talked to my students back to spring, I also say the same things, very similar. Yeah, that's also one of the driving force that pushing me very hard to play with ChatGPT and also other large language models to discover what are the ways we can instruct our students to minimize the hallucinations from ChatGPT's response or other language models' response, and how to critically evaluate their response. And yeah, so I think this is a very good question.
Yeah, same here. I feel like it's kind of like just once the wheels start rolling, there's like no reverse way, right? It's just like we can control how fast it rolls and how ready we are. And I think people were scared, and it's absolutely normal. And even like AI scientists who developed these models, a lot of them start to rethink about it, right? You have seen like Yoshua Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, they have been really worried about the tools they invented on their own. So and there was kind of like some movement that they want to pause the AI development for 6 months, and then so that it gives us more time to think about how to use this tool properly. And I feel like it's never late to think about it and really address it properly.
So while we're also including some of these AI skill sets into the students, our coursework and the students that we're seeing coming through now, because the landscape is changing so quickly and we don't ultimately know what's happening, 4 years down the line for freshmen that are coming in, are there any skills that you might focus a little bit more on so that students who are entering this landscape that's constantly changing, we don't even know what it's going to look like 4 years from now, that they might be able to pick up or, put some more focus on while they're in their classes?
Yeah, to talk a little bit about this. So the AI field is evolving very fast, and that speed is by months. So this is very different from other fields. So many things invented 1 year, 2 years ago out of time in the AI field. So that asking for some fundamental skills. Are there any fundamental skills we can guide our students to interact with the AI tools? I don't have very clear answer to these ones, but the important thing is communications with chatbots. So some of these prompting skills can be fundamental. And the second advice I could give is whenever you talk to ChatGPTs, you could start from small questions and step by step to your big questions. So this is also one part of the prompting skill. Yeah, so I think iteration is also important because at the beginning you may not be able to get the ideal answers. So provide the feedback and refine the response and go on to get the idea of better response. Practice. So this is one thing I could give. So I think Amanda mentioned one time, so like a couple of months ago, so the same prompt, right? It compared the response a couple of months ago and now they're different. So and even at the same time, the answer could be different. So that is because of the nature of the response. So technically it's called a temperature. So the temperature by default is 0.7, meaning that it will give you some variation in the response. And the response you get this time may not be the best answer, so repeat it. So this is one thing. The other thing is try different model. You have different chatbots, right? So try different models because the chatbots are trained on different materials. Their response maybe converge, maybe diverge. So, and then by that point, you need to use critical thinking to judge which one is better.
I think for me, when I think about what it is I'm trying to help my students with, I'm trying to think of how the best way to phrase this is helping them understand that sometimes the final answer isn't really the point. Sometimes it's trying, that process of getting to the answer is what's so important. And I think, our students, when we think of, a lot of my students now, whether they be undergraduate, they be graduate, some of them are working, they're taking courses full time, they're very, very busy. And so for them, sometimes they think, oh, well, as long as I get the right answer, that's what's really important. And ChatGPT could be really good at just giving them the right answer at the end. But if they're trying to learn material, it's really that, that steps in the learning that gets them there. So I think in particular, I teach coding. And so yes, they could put in the ChatGPT and get the answer. But if they're beginning, if they're in an introductory coding course, they have to know what that code is to be able to critique what ChatGPT gives them. So kind of distinguishing for that for students, helping them understand that, yes, this is a tool that can give you the end point, and at some point in your coding career, that may be all you need. But at this point, you're actually trying to learn how to read that code. You're trying to learn how to write it, how to debug it. The actual process of that struggle is important. And so having those conversations with students so they understand that difference, I think is really important. And I think that will help them, learn, okay, there is an appropriate time for this tool. Maybe this is how I use this tool, but it's also really important that I go through these other steps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to add on that. So I'm definitely very, very optimistic about this. And I feel like the purpose of this kind of tools is to make more people like do coding without even know coding very explicitly. I've seen beautiful like kind of like drawing and analysis done by a high school student who doesn't even know Python from basics, and they were able to produce things that they was able to produce with prompting. So I think really this kind of like reverse how we traditionally teach is we need them to understand the bottom before they can really do the top part. And now it's kind of like you give them a sense about how it's like using these tools from the top part. And for student who is really interested and dedicated, they can dig deeper and understand what's going on between these tools. And I think this has been traditionally how computer science is taught, right? Like most of people start to just using packages without digging into each of the packages, how they're written. So I kind of like really feel like some of analogy here, and I feel like this kind of tools are to make this kind of like more technical perspective more accessible to general public.
So it seems like the theme is communication skills for the students to pick up, but also for us as educators to make sure students understand why they're doing these things, why it's important to understand. So that's really great. There is another question that came through. We have two more questions. I'm going to try to get to both of these in our remaining time. So some students enter undergraduate or graduate programs with very limited computer skills. When should these students be introduced to things like ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
No, you go first and then I'll go.
Okay, yeah, that question is actually I've think about this question for many years. So since I've become a director of mathematics school at West Virginia universities, so many of our students here are very excellent and they're very eager to learn coding. And the learning coding is something not very easy because they don't have the basis at the beginning. So the learning curve for coding is very sharp, but on the other side, which I call the forgetting curve. So the forgetting curve is also very sharp. So the student can learn the coding through the semester, right? But if there is no active project working on, they potentially very likely to forget the skill. So I think one of the major issues is that to learn coding, if you always have a mentor, right, 24 hours, 7 days available to the students, and that will help the students better manage the skill. But very often as the mentor is not available there and there is no active project, and then so quickly the student may forget what they learned. So I think one important thing for students to learn coding is to boost their interest, right? So I think ChatGPT or Code Interpreter is a tool that show coding is something not that so difficult. So starting from some very basic data analysis, you can upload your data, do some very basic data analysis, and there is code shown on there. So you can chat with ChatGPT to ask, hey, explain this code line by line to me, and ChatGPT can do that. And it's very good at doing things like that ones. And through that things, students can learn coding by student self. Yeah, so in this sense, I think ChatGPT make coding or learning coding more accessible to the students. But I think it's also very important, especially for the beginners. It is very important to have human of faculty to teach some of the basics in coding, right? So for example, what is if, what is for, what is a loop, or things like that, very basic. So, and that serves as a booster kind of for students to work with ChatGPT to gain some later skills.
So I will I agree with the whoever said that some students in our undergraduate graduate program are very limited with computer skills. I see this all the time, and I think we could have a whole separate conversation about why that is and so on. But I will say, you know, when it comes to using ChatGPT, I don't think you need a lot of computer skills, especially depending on how you're using it. You know, if you're using it to help with text, for example, I mean, it's as simple as writing a text message almost. I don't think they need a whole lot of computer skills if they're going to use it in that way. So I mean, I think if you wanted to help them with writing or have ChatGPT help with writing, I think at any level they could use it. I mean, it's as simple as entering the website and typing into the box, and then it gives you answers. Now for more sophisticated things like coding, like Michael said, I mean, I think you could use it to maybe help build interest, because again, the actual platform itself is very user-friendly and easy to use. Now, when it comes to, you know, helping with more complex tasks, if the students, you know, have limited computer skills, they may not understand what it is that ChatGPT is producing. And that's probably what concerns me more when it comes to code, that they're getting things, but they don't understand, you know, are the things that are produced correct?
Okay, I'm going to move on to our last question in the Q&A, and then we'll have some concluding remarks. So it says, given the pace of change in the landscape, is this an issue that faculty can solve without involving non-faculty stakeholders in the conversation? Is the usual committee process going to enable universities to adapt quickly enough?
My answer to the first one is no. The second one, the reason my answer to the first one is no is because, again, thinking about, you know, hopefully we are preparing ourselves, or preparing our students rather, for when they leave us. And so an example of this would be, so suppose that actually we're having these conversations right now. So I'm in the College of Public Health, and one of our departments trains a lot of students who go and work in the health department. So they had been training students to primarily code in SAS, but what they're finding is the health departments, which is one of our major employers, they are moving to coding in R because it's free. And so now there's this dilemma. We have traditionally taught SAS, but we know when they get out in the workforce, they're likely to use R. And so the question is, we should probably switch, or at least, you know, offer both. And I think the same argument can be made here. You know, I need to be talking to my stakeholders to know what skills they want students to have. And if this is a skill that my stakeholders want students to have, then I think I should be introducing students to those tools and helping them learn how to use them.
Yes, I agree. It's important to get a student's perspective. And in the example of coding, so the perspective or ChatGPT assisted coding. So the perspective we got from students from computer science could be very different from the perspective we got from the students from school of medicine. So computer science students, most of them are already very well at coding, right? They probably see ChatGPT as not so helpful for them to develop a novel algorithm, for example. But from school of medicine students, many of these data analysis are very basic, or the coding are very basic, is very standardized, and the ChatGPT has many of this already trained in their training data sets. And in this sense, that could be make data analysis more accessible to students from school of medicine.
So from a computer science perspective, so I still think the thing is there is limitations, right? ChatGPT cannot deal with very long text. So I definitely think that academia settings and it should be okay for certain cases, but like usually really when the student enter into the society and they're managing way larger product project, it's a little bit different from what currently ChatGPT can handle. And another thing is it goes back to what we have discussed at the beginning is the critical thinking, because a lot of times I guess the skills we're training students to is more generic skills that can help them to adapt to specific job requirement or task specifications eventually. And I'm just so far I feel like this gap need to be addressed properly, so that way we know like what are the right tools we're teaching the students and what is the best for getting them prepared. And those are the things I feel like it definitely needs to be discussed with the non-stakeholders as well.
Okay, thank you so much. We have just about 10 or so minutes left. So I would like to close out this session with asking each of the panelists just kind of some final remarks. With respect to the academic setting, where do you see ChatGPT and other similar tools 5 or 10 years from now? So let's say we have a webinar 10 years from now, we all get back together. What do you see the setting looking like?
Yeah, who knows? I feel like maybe in 5 years it's not me sitting here, it's my language model kind of like a version sitting here answer all the questions, and it might does a better job than me.
So from my perspective, in the future, 5 years probably is too long, probably 1 or 2 years. Because the field of AI is evolved very fast, unbelievable fast. So I think there is a greater possibility. Many of these data analysis are very basic or can be standardized, and that can be done by chatbots, or can be greatly assisted by chatbots. And so this is one thing I see it could happen very fast. So, but that gives us more time to think about something more important and more critical, and more involves critical thinking. So that is not something bad, it's something good.
So I'll say my maybe if it's more of a hope in 5 years is that we have less uncertainty and less just unknown about it in the sense of like how we're going to incorporate it. And so in 5 years, I see, especially in the education landscape, that we know how to use this tool much better, and we know how to prepare our students and to use it, and then it becomes incorporated more in our classrooms, and it's used as a tool. And we just have a much better feel of how that we're doing that, and we're doing it in a way that helps prepare students for when they leave us, and a better idea of how it's going to be used in the workforce. So a lot of the uncertainty and the fear is gone in 5 years is what I hope and I foresee.
All right. Well, this concludes today's session. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Dong, Dr. Ellis, and Dr. Hu. Thank you to our audience for taking the time to attend today's webinar. And thank you to NIST for organizing and hosting this event. Have a great day, everyone.